Record. There we go. Okay, so this is the study session for the midterm exam. And the goals here are to go over the expectations for the exam, and then also to go over the questions and then see if people have any questions about the questions themselves. So I'm going to share my screen here. And let me bring up our Canvas site. All right, there we go. Okay, so let's click on the midterm exam information and study session here. Okay, so you should have received the exam questions. They were available at midnight today. And so let's talk a little bit of big picture about the exam. So the exam, you have it, and then you have until Sunday. So you see there, the exam is due on Sunday, October 30th at 11:59 p.m. And so you have several days to work on it, but do keep in mind you still have some quizzes that are due. I've extended the due date for the quizzes for the lectures on the presidency, the lecture quiz and the reading quiz, but that material is open and you can work on it if you want. But so anyways, you know, you kind of have two things that are due this week, one of which is obviously this midterm exam. The exam is worth 16.5% of your overall grade, 165 points. So it's worth a lot, but you know, so hopefully you'll do well. But if you fall a little short, it's not the end of your grade either. So keep that in mind. But obviously I want everybody to bring 100% to the exam as they can. The exam is obviously take home, since this is an asynchronous online class. It's open book, open notes. It's not timed. Well, I mean, it's timed. The timing starts today and you have until the end of Sunday to complete it, right? So there is a time limit, but it's not like a quiz or, you know, once you start it, you don't need to complete it in 3 hours or anything like that. And then the exam covers all the material that we've done so far. So from topic 1 to topic 6. There are 6 questions on the exam and you answer 4 of them, okay? And obviously it's an essay format. And so oftentimes students want to know, how long is this exam supposed to be? So, and sometimes I just say, answer the questions, right? And students don't like that answer. So that, you know, to adequately answer the question, I think you need about 2 double-spaced type pages for a total then of 8 double-spaced type pages. And so your exam should shoot for that length, okay? A little bit less, okay, a little bit more, okay. But if you complete your exam and you've got 4 typed pages, you probably want to go back and see if you actually like fully answered all the prompts in the question and really demonstrated your understanding of this material, right? I mean, I kind of assume that people don't know what they're talking about. And so I wait for students to demonstrate that they understand this material and that they have read the course material and are using it to support their points. So if you're coming in a little short, go back and take a look at, hey, did I really develop this answer? And then if your exam is too long, you're going to need to edit it. So anything over 10 pages is you know, too long. And so, you know, you don't need to tell me everything you know about the material. So you go back and, you know, make sure you're not like covering everything in great detail. I mean, summarizing is good, right? You just need to demonstrate that you understand this material. I want you to submit the document as one, submit the exam as one document. Don't do a separate document for each question because it's really hard for me to grade if you do that, okay? So just create a Word doc. We'll talk about that in a second, and then answer on the one doc and then upload it to Canvas. So what am I looking for in terms of an A paper, an A exam? Well, one thing I look for is, did you answer all the prompts in the question? Okay. Much like our discussions where there are multiple prompts, the exam is similar to that. So make sure that you fully answer each of the prompts. If you miss a prompt, you're going to lose points. Okay. So check yourself on that. And that you want to demonstrate that you have excellent understanding of the course concepts, okay? And so, provide enough detail in your answers and using course materials so that there's no question in my mind that you understand this material. Also, I want you to use a robust array of course materials. You don't need to use outside material for this. I mean, you can if you want, but it's really not necessary. Everything you need to answer these questions is in the textbook, in the lectures, and the supplementary articles and the course commentary for the class, okay? And so make sure that you use all of that material for the exam. Now, what that means is that I'm going to look at your exam globally. So you don't have to use all of the materials in answering each question, right? So for like question 1, you could use the textbook and lectures. For question 2, lectures and articles, right? For question 3, maybe all 3, right? That's okay. But if you're only using the textbook to answer the questions, you're going to lose points. If you're only using lectures, which oftentimes students do, you're going to lose points. Glad you're watching the lectures, right? But you also have to demonstrate that you've thought about the articles and making connections to the articles in the textbook, okay? So make sure that your answer is sort of global in terms of resource use. And then proofread it. If I'm struggling over understanding what you're saying, I'm not going to struggle real hard with it, right? So, be clear, proofread it, read it out loud so you can see, does it flow? And for the love of God, use paragraphs, okay? Don't just have your answer be like 2 pages, right? Like that. That's like when you start a new idea, start a new paragraph. And then finally, since you're going to be using course resources, you're going to want to cite those resources. And so if you're just using an idea or a concept from the course resources, just use an in-text citation. So We the People, parentheses, page 123 is the example there. If you take something from lecture, topic 5, lecture 1, do an insight citation. You don't need a works cited page. I know what the textbook is, right? If you're using outside resources, you are going to want to use a works cited page, but like I said, I don't think you need to use those. However, if you are using a direct quote from lecture, course commentary, or the textbook, you're going to want to cite it. You're also going to want to put it in quotation marks, because if you don't put it in quotation marks, that's a grave foul, right? I mean, that's serious because that's plagiarism. So when in doubt, use quotation marks, okay? Particularly if you are using a verbatim quote. And then finally, you can work with others when you're studying. That's totally cool. But this has to be your unique work. It can't be a collaboration with others. So make sure that what you're submitting is your own and sole work. Okay, so that's a summary. I'm going to stop sharing the screen. And Alana, since you're the only one here, I'm going to ask you, do you have any questions about the expectations for the exam? Is there anything that you need clarified or anything?
Not off the top of my head. I did actually have one question in regards to the first prompt. So obviously we're talking about, okay, what do we need for key values as a democracy? Obviously in topic 1, we talked a lot about like, okay, in a democratic government, you need the values of liberty, equality, and democracy. Just some general ideas of addition to that, because I think obviously equality and quality and liberty, those are all very, those are obviously core values, right? Any good democracy, but it's kind of redundant to say, well, the core value of democracy is democracy.
Yeah, definitely. So let's turn our sights to actually looking at the questions. And that's good because the question you have questions about is the first question. So let's take a look at those. And then, we'll go through the first question and then I'll ask you, hey, do you have questions about that question? And then we'll address that. So let's take a look at the question first, and then I'll answer your question. Does that make sense?
Yes, sounds good.
Cool. So I'll share my screen again. All right, get rid of this. And now there's the midterm exam. Okay, cool. Oh, I did want to say that that make sure that you save your document to your hard drive, desktop, or zip drive. So you open this document, save it, right? I've had students who work on their exam and then they forget to save it. And then are like, oh, they upload like a blank document. So make sure that you save it to something, a zip drive, just word of the wise. Okay, so let's go through the questions, and then Alana, I'll ask you questions about the specific questions. All right, so first question. Just because a country calls itself a democracy doesn't make it a democracy. For a country to be truly democratic, it needs to embody certain principles and values that are necessary to building and maintaining a democratic society. Drawing upon course materials, including the song essay, identify and describe 3 principles that you think are most important for the maintenance of democracy, making sure to explain why you think these 3 are the most important. Next, so that's first. Next, evaluate how well you think the United States is doing in terms of realizing these principles. In what ways is the United States living up to the principles of democracy? Where does the United States fall short? And make sure to support your evaluation of the United States with evidence from course material, okay? So I'm gonna stop the share and bring you back in here, okay, Alana? And so your question is like, when we're talking about those key principles, you know, just saying liberty and equality and democracy are necessary for democracies probably doesn't go far enough. Okay.
Yeah.
And so what I would encourage you to do is review the lecture from topic 1 and also the Sarah Song article, right? And so like in the Sarah Song article, she talks about civic solidarity and how you cannot have a democracy if you don't have civic solidarity. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm looking for. I'm not, that, in lecture, it points to, and I don't want to give away the answer. Okay. But it points to that to be a democracy is rule of the people. Well, what do people have to be able to have the ability to rule, right?
Yeah.
So, they need this.
Ability to compromise, communication, things like that.
Right, political knowledge, right? Like we only care about democracy if we feel like our voice makes a difference, right? I mean, that's our democracy is in jeopardy right now because people feel like government doesn't listen to the people and that their voices don't matter. If you don't have that, you can't have a democracy. So it's that kind of thing. I do think that liberty and equality are part of that, but be specific, right? Like, what kinds of freedoms do you need for a democratic society to thrive, right? And what kinds of equalities do you need, right? In particular, political equality. Just that's a hint. I'll leave it at that. So, dig in deeply in terms of that. And I think you'll find the tools that you need in both the Sarah Song article, but also in the lecture that's sort of like, I think it starts with the picture of Kim Jong-un, right? And it's sort of like, what do you really need? And then it does sort of a critical analysis of that. Does that ring a bell?
Yes.
Excellent. Excellent. Do you have other questions about that question?
Not specifically that question, no.
All right, let's go back to the next question.
Okay.
Share the screen. Oh yeah. Made some changes to this question this semester because I wanted to talk about tyranny of the minority. So the framers of the Constitution were very aware of the problems associated with the democratic form of government, right? We know that democratic form of government was a new form of government. They were worried it wasn't going to last. The framers knew that for democracy to not just survive, but thrive, they needed to create a constitution that placed a check on threats to democracy. First, so I'll give you a hint, it's a freshman level class, right? Freshman, sophomore. First, explain how tyranny of the majority and abuse of power poses a threat to the democratic form of government, okay? Making sure to define and provide specific examples of these concepts in your answer, okay? So pretty straightforward. Next, explain how 2 of the following reduce the harmful effects of the above threats. We talked about the architecture of democracy, and that the architecture of democracy is that separation of powers that's in our Constitution, the checks and balances in the Constitution, and federalism as well. So make sure to choose 2 of those and explain first what we mean by separation of powers and federalism or whatever 2 you choose, and then provide concrete examples of how these concepts reduce the threat of democracy. In other words, how does federalism place a check on the abuse of power? How does separation of powers put a check on the abuse of powers? How do checks and balances reduce tyranny of the majority? Okay. So I want to see that sort of intersection there. Okay. And then finally, and this is what's going to separate the A's from the rest, right? This piece. Okay. In the topic 6, lecture 2, I gave that we talked about, it was about Congress, but it was about some of the problems with Congress. And so I want you guys to think about tyranny of the majority. So our framers felt that tyranny of the majority was a threat to American democracies. Do you think that the framers overestimated the danger that majority rule poses to democracy? Does tyranny of the minority currently pose a greater threat to democracy than tyranny of the majority? And explain your answer. Okay. And then gives you the hint there to refer to that. So what do you think about that question? Do you have questions about that question?
I can't think of any off the top of my head. That sounds comprehensive to me.
Okay. And also there's no right answer. You could say, you know what? I still think tyranny of the majority is a threat to democracy. A greater threat than tyranny of the minority. So there's no right answer. It's just sort of like make a case and then support your reasoning with evidence. Let's see, what's number 3? The Bill of Rights. Looks like I didn't give you guys a federalism question. I think I got sick of reading questions about like the 4 eras of federalism. So we learned a lot about civil liberties, right? So there's a lot to deal with in that chapter. So I'm giving you guys an opportunity to just sort of like think globally, I guess, about civil liberties. So of the personal liberties guaranteed by the Bill of Rights, which 3 liberties do you think are essential to maintaining a democratic society? So again, you're taking the idea of what you need for democratic society and the intersection between that and civil freedoms, civil rights, or I'm sorry, civil liberties, personal freedoms. In other words, if you could only select 3 civil liberties which the government is prohibited from encroaching, which would you choose and why? No right answer, just make a strong case. On the flip side, which 2 liberties you cannot use the Third Amendment courting of soldiers? Because students are like, throw that one out. It's not relevant anymore, so can't use that. So which 2 liberties, excluding the quartering liberty, do you think are not as essential to maintaining a democratic society? One could make a case that they're all essential, but if you were forced to choose 2, which 2 would you choose and why? In other words, what 2 liberties could be eliminated from the Bill of Rights with little to no impact on democracy? And a big hint here is, got to bring it back to democracy. You can't say, I want to have X, and so don't take away X. Like, I want a lot of things, but that doesn't mean it's like nurturing to democratic society. So bring that loop back to democratic society. And so make sure to provide a brief explanation of each of the liberties that you choose, as well as well-developed reasons for your choices. And then also, you can't pick the First Amendment, right? I'd take the First Amendment and the Sixth Amendment, right? Those have like multitudes of liberties. So you like, if you want to do something in the first, you could choose speech and the free exercise of religion, right? But then you've used 2 of your choices, okay? So you've got to speak to specific liberties, not whole amendments, because then it would be too easy. So what do you think about that? Do you have any questions about that question?
I do not. I'm sorry. There's somebody blowing. They're using a machine very close to my window right now. But I don't have any specific questions off the top of my head now.
Okay, good. That should be a fun question. I hope students answer it because it gives you an opportunity to, sort of think critically about which liberties are important to you. Fourth, this question is pretty straightforward. It's pretty descriptive. Many advances. Oh, and I'm actually going to add something to this question, which I need to do like right after we stop talking. Hopefully nobody started working on this. Many advances in civil rights have been accomplished through federal legislation. Describe the different parts of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. What have these 2 laws accomplished? How might civil rights laws be expanded or changed in order to address inequalities that continue to persist today? Explain your answer. I'll just say, you don't need to tell me everything about the Civil Rights Act of 1964. You don't need to tell me everything about the Voting Rights Act. Summarize. And even though it's in there, what I was going to add is that the best answers are going to reference the Hannah Nicole Jones article, What is Owed, right? I haven't said that in the past, and that's been an expectation that I've had, but I want to make it explicit. So I'm going to add that to this after we talk, and then I'll just let class know that I added it to it. It's actually just a leg up. It's not, you could still answer that question and make reference to that. I would expect people to do it, but I don't think people did it enough last semester. Last night I was like, oh, don't forget to add that. Pretty straightforward question. You got any questions about that? Okay. And so there was a lecture this week on sociological representation. And so this is, and the textbook talks about it as well. And so there are many different ways that members of Congress can represent the American people. Define and discuss the difference between sociological representation, which was in lecture, and agency representation, which is in the textbook. Making sure to provide concrete examples of each of these theories in your answers. Okay, that's descriptive. It's either right or wrong. Of these two theories, which do you think comes closest to representing the American people today? So you can make a choice. I think there's a right answer to that, but I think I could be persuaded on either of them, but just use evidence to support. And then here, there is no right answer. Of the two, which theory do you think comes closest to how the US Congress should represent the American people? So one is like thinking about Congress today, which of those theories does the best job describing the present day Congress? But in terms of like the theory of representation, like which is better, agency or sociological representation? Okay. Questions about that question? Are you understanding the difference between agency and sociological representation, do you think? Yeah, pretty straightforward. And then the boring question, but feel free to answer it. But some students really like to talk about how a bill becomes a law, and that's totally great. So I always give them that opportunity. So describe the process by which a bill becomes a law. What are the major steps in the process? What are the main differences in the legislative process between the House and the Congress? What role do party leadership and presidents play in the process? So very descriptive. And it's important to know, right? I mean, when members of Congress join Congress, they actually go to like American Government 101. So because a lot of them don't know how it becomes a law. So it's an important process to know. And then the critical thinking piece is this is where you get to bring, your critical thinking acumen into this, is like, what are the biggest hurdles like of the legislative process? And if you were going to make a change to the process, what would it be and why? And here's like a little hint. Maybe it's the specific legislative process, but maybe it's about parties, party leadership, and the leaders and the party's relationship to each other, and the party's relationship to the president. Feel free to bring that into the mix as well. Okay. And if you think everything's hunky dory, awesome, but you need to explain why. Okay. So if you don't think any changes are necessary. All right. I'm going to stop the share there. So what do you think? Questions about that one? I think you're muted. You are muted.
Sorry.
It's all good.
Off the top of my head, just something that kind of occurred to me when we're talking about like hurdles for like the legislative process, how bills become laws and all of that. Do you think it's like okay to like talk about like external factors like outside of Congress itself, like you have like lobbyists and so on and so forth?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as long as they in Congress they talk about sort of external influences on Congress, so feel free to bring that in the mix, right? Because like we're seeing today, and we haven't gotten to campaigns and elections yet, but elections play a huge impact on either like reducing hurdles, right? Or presenting hurdles, right? Mm-hmm. Worrying about how that's going to play out in the upcoming election, right? That maybe you want to, pass more robust gun control legislation. Democrats might want to do that, but they might be like, hell, we ain't going to do that right before the midterms because we're going to lose, right? Because it's unpopular, right? And so, yeah, you can talk about elections, you can talk about lobbying, and you can also just sort of talk about sort of the difficulties that are associated with the process itself, right? There are a lot of checks and balances, particularly in the House, in terms of how legislation moves forward. So, I mean, a lot of times, like bills just now, as you probably know from writing your simulated letter to Congress, I mean, so many bills just never make it to the floor of the House or the Senate, you know? And so there are some pretty significant hurdles just within the process itself. But yeah, anything that you can bring and that you could substantiate with resources, even if they're external resources, that's good.
Okay.
All right. Do you feel like ready to tackle this exam?
I think so. I get a lot of anxiety surrounding like school and stuff, but all in all, I'm feeling okay about this.
All right, well, cool. Well, hopefully the time will like give you some time to work on it and like reduce anxiety. But you and anybody listening to this, just if you have questions as you're working on your exam, I can't give you answers, but I can definitely give you clarification and guidance. And I'm always around-ish. So, you know, don't hesitate to email, text, or set up a meeting if you want to, okay?
All right.
All right, well, thanks for attending. And
thank you for hosting.
Yeah, and good luck on your exam, okay?
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. Bye.
Bye.